brothers, do you recall when the grasslands reached to the horizon? And the deafening roar of countless wings overhead. Back when Rome was a village at Britain, the Emerald Island. Before we gave up on our future and buried our dead. And so we are starting, I think we're on episode, what, 32? Mm-hmm. Okay, we're on episode 32, and we are going to be starting on the lovely subject of Greco-Persian wars. A subject that has been talked to, glorified to, and celebrated to death in the Western culture. That is hailed as being the key, I don't know how to even put it, a key aspect of the formation of the Western culture is such that when, and I'm quoting the propaganda, when democracy triumphed over the tyranny and autocracy of the East and stuff. Well, I'm sure a lot of you seen the movie 300, which is a beautiful representation of a comics vision of the events. It has nothing to do with history. Main character that we're going to be talking about today certainly was never a sex slave. But I would like to send out a shout, of course, to Marwaen for his willingness for me to let me use his material, and to Herodotus for writing down his map. Interviews with the descendants of the survivors of the Greco-Persian wars, which is how we know majority of the information we have about Greco-Persian wars. Pretty much all of it comes from the Greek perspective. And as we all know, victors don't always write down the truth about the events that led them there. We're going to start our discussion of the Greco-Persian wars by, not the heroic stand of the 300, not by the discussion of the miraculous victories that the Greeks had over the Persian armies and fleet. We're going to talk about a little girl who really did not want to get married. So the story is going to start way before the entire kind of history began of the Greco-Persian conflict. As we all know, during the Dorian invasion, the original tribes that were populating what later became the Greek territory, our heroic peoples that were represented in Homer's Iliad, those who defeated the Trojans, they fled, a lot of them fled the mainland Greece, and they fled to the opposite side of the sea, and they settled down in the Anatolia region. And they formed their own cultures, their own city-states that continued to live very much in a Greekish sort of way, but nonetheless independent and separate from it. After they settled some years later, a group of Dorian Greeks had some conflict with their surrounding fellow Dorian Greeks, and they also took to their ships, and they also fled what today is mainland Greece, and they also landed in Anatolia, and they founded their own city. And that city was not very big, it was not very prosperous, it was just kind of an average city, kind of on the outskirts of the world as we know it. It was a city that was mainly a layover place for ships that were engaged in various trade routes around the region. I'm going to pull up a map, and David is not very... yeah, we tried to find this map in English. I promise you, all my other maps are in English, except for this one, which is in Russian. The city of Halicarnassus, as you guys pronounce it, will be located right here. And that's just so that you have an idea. And it's kind of off the main territories. And I'm going to go ahead and stop share and open up another map, just so that you guys can correlate where Halicarnassus is to the other cities that were involved in the greater Greek and Persian conflict. This city was a little bit off to the side, and it was not such a main city to be considered by either sides of a conflict very, very much. So, here's Lydia, here's the city of Sardis that the Greeks originally, the rebellious Greeks originally from the Ionia originally sacked. And here is Caria, which is the area where our city of Halicarnassus is about here. That's where it exists. So in this city, they lived their life. They had a pretty neat arrangement. They had between two harbors. So they dug a canal, and so what they would do is ships would come in from the long sea voyage. They would be in disrepair, and so the ship would proceed from one harbor to the other harbor along this canal, while the local workers would work on the ships and repair them. In a rather conveyor-like mode, would quickly put them back on track and back out to the sea. And that was the main, I guess, source of income in this neighborhood. The reason why they were not very prominent in that, and basically what existed at that time, which was the Persian Greek states, because Persian Greek states already had blooming cities. They had Hephaestus, they had Miletus. Miletus in particular was big and looming and very commercially successful city, very rich. And Halicarnassus was just sitting off to the side doing its own little thing, dealing with a lot of pirates. It was a place where people came from all around the world. Traders came from Persia. Of course, traders came from Phoenicia, from all other kinds of peoples, and pirates who were coming through there would get their ships repaired. And this particular little city was ruled by, I guess, what we would call a tyrant. I'm not even sure if he was a tyrant. It just had basically a king. I mean, he wasn't called the king, he was the ruler of the city, but for all the practical purposes, he was basically a little local lord, whose name was Legdameus. Legdame, I can't pronounce, Legdameus. And he had children, of course, and he had 2 sons and a daughter. And his oldest son was, his name was Creont, and his youngest son was named Creomant, so that they're easy to tell apart, right? And then his daughter, his only daughter, was named Artemisia in honor of the goddess Artemis. Artemisia was, she had a problem. Since the moment she was born, being a ruler's offspring, as is often the case, you don't marry your daughters off to just anybody. You want to marry them off to somebody of some significance somewhere. But the problem was that this little city was a Dorian enclave in a more or less hostile population of the Achaean Greeks that have immigrated there earlier, who did not really like the Dorian invaders who now came upon their new lands and settled their own city. The local Greeks of the first wave were somewhat suspicious of the Dorian women, and the tribe, the peoples who founded the city, they were more akin to Spartans, really, than they were to other Greek city-states. They had, and as we all remember, in Sparta, the females were fairly, the females were fairly well recognized. They had a certain level of certain clout, certain weight within certain aspects of the society. And the rest of the Greek world, the females were not very highly looked upon. They were usually designated to sit at home and tend to the children and not meddle into male affairs. So to the conservative Achaean Greeks, this Dorian princess was kind of maybe not such a good idea. I mean, running joke was, I think might be better off marrying a she-goat, because she-goat would have better manners than this barbarous princess. Bottom line is, the girl was growing up knowing that she was going to be married, she's going to have to be married, but whom she's going to get married to was going to be a problem. Was she going to be married to a passing by merchant? Was she going to be married to basically a barbarian? Not a very good fate for a spoiled, beloved young princess, basically, for lack of a better term. And because she was spoiled, beloved young princess of a not very significant city that was kind of not bothered much by anyone, her father was rather indulgent of her. He possibly felt bad about her upcoming marital situation, and so he more or less let her run amok and do what she wanted to do. What does this girl want to do in a city that was populated basically by pirates and traveling merchants from the sea? She loved the sea. She really loved the sea. She loved sailing. She spent a lot of time talking to sailors, listening to their stories. She wanted to be a sailor. And so this girl started playing, not as little girls are supposed to be playing, especially Greek little girls, somewhere in a corner with their various domestic implements. She started dreaming about voyaging out to the sea. And her father kind of let her do it because, she wasn't the oldest daughter. She wasn't the oldest child. She was a daughter. This went on for a while. When the girl started reaching maturity and, one of her big birthday celebrations, coming of age celebrations, as a present, she asked her father to please basically let her have her own toy boat, which by toy boat, of course, it was a seafaring boat. It wasn't, you know, proper large-scale ship, but it's something that she could at least kind of play at being a seafaring commander. And he gave her a crew of slaves and sailors who would be tending to her, and he gave her a good, what's the word for it? The person who's in charge of a ship, of navigation, navigator. Yeah, navigator. And so, you know, she would make little fun voyages back and forth. And, you know, she at first, of course, under the supervision of the navigator and, you know, the experienced captain that was given to her, assigned to her. But over time, she was really into this. And so she started learning the ropes. She started getting fairly good. And even at one point in time, rumor has it, she might have even voyaged out as far as Athens, which would have been an absolute shock and just dismayed all the surrounding Greek city-states. A scandal, really, because a woman running around, you know, commanding a ship, there's something really wrong with the old king. He's really spoiled this little brat of his. This is just and that, of course, made her marriageability go down further, because who would want a wife who's so bold as to actually be out on the waters commanding men and doing all these unwifely, unseemly things. Now, her brothers looked upon all of this with some disdain and some disapproval, because as far as they were concerned, she was bringing shame to the household. But the father was very indulgent of his daughter. And at one point in time, she got a dream of, you know, when years passed, she got older, she was getting to the point where she was, yeah, there was probably some marriage proposals from some not very fitting suitors who would have not brought a very good alliance to the city-state that she was representing. So, and her father wasn't really pressuring her to get married. She was in no rush to get married. There was even a legend that when she was still young, when she first felt her first signs of her maturity, of her womanhood coming on, that she made a vow that she would never be married to anyone but Poseidon himself, that she loved the sea so much that the only fitting spouse for her, the only fitting husband, would have been Poseidon. Well, she got older. She was getting to the point where she's about 16 years old. She's getting past marriageable age. I mean, she started asking her father to let her maybe take, you know, matters into her own hands and maybe lead a trading caravan. And the trading caravan was not going anywhere near. It was going somewhere fairly far. And I'm going to pull that Russian map back up so you guys understand the scale, because for ancient Greeks, this was a really kind of a perilous journey. She was heading off to Xerxes, which is in modern-day Crimea. So from here, she'd be voyaging through the Straits of Bosphorus, and she would be voyaging to Xerxes. Now, this passage by ancient Greeks, this entire passage was considered to be extremely dangerous, extremely tricky. It's something that, this right here, what you're looking at is the map of supposed travels of Herodotus himself. And you can see how Greek ships would hug the shore pretty much because they were not very comfortable. The Black Sea in general was considered to be fairly treacherous and not very safe territory, but this passage right here was something that only most experienced, most trustworthy captains would undertake. Well, she wanted to lead this trading caravan. She bothered her father, and her father probably would have never allowed her to do this if her brothers didn't step in. And suddenly, surprisingly, on her behalf, and said, well, you know what, she's probably going to be married soon. It's her last little fit. Let her do what she wants to do. Let her go right ahead and have fun. And swayed by his children's opinion, the king allowed his daughter to lead this caravan of ships through on this very perilous trading journey. Well, she made it there. She succeeded. And on the way back, and of course, she wasn't the one who was leading the ships. Of course, there was an experienced captain. There was 14 or more ships there. There was experienced navigators. I mean, she had her own little ship under command, but she was definitely not the person in charge of the entire fleet. Well, on the way back, right as they were entering the treacherous waters, the story has it that they were hit by a horrible storm. A storm that was so horrible, the ships were starting to get lost, and some sort of an accident happened. And the man who was supposed to be her mentor, who was supposed to be her teacher, her supervisor, the man who was supposed to be in charge of the entire passage and the entire caravan, got thrown overboard, or somehow basically was incapacitated. And of course, what was left of the fleet was in absolutely dire situation. A decision had to be made. It had to be made right now. And the young girl, she took upon herself the command of the passage of this entire ship caravan. And she suddenly, very decisively, because they had some ships that were damaged, some ships that were stocked with various goods that were too slow and were not likely to make the passage. She made a very immediate and kind of a harsh decision to leave those ships behind. And she led 11 of the ships of the caravan through the treacherous waters, and she led them through there alive. Well, it's caravan of ships. I mean, it's a fleet, but I mean, if ships can caravan, I suppose it's yeah. But anyway, so they got through. And of course, when they arrived back in back to their home city and told the story, I mean, the sailors told the story how this woman, not woman, a young girl, has saved their lives. Her father was, of course, rejoiced. Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you why her brothers were so keen on her going on this little journey, because it was considered to be a very perilous journey, and they really hoped that she would just go away and not come back. Well, she came back. She came back in this absolute kind of, I guess, of glow of glory, of hero status, and because she prayed to Poseidon before she made the decision to take over the fleet. She prayed to Poseidon, and she said that Poseidon answered her, and some of the other sailors saw Poseidon answer her and guide their ships through this perilous passage. And so her reputation of being somebody who is beloved of Poseidon, somebody who had a special relationship with the sea, somebody who was designated and designed to be basically sea captain, to be somebody who would lead fleets, grew. And her father was so grateful for his daughter's safe passage and her safe return that they even the people who sailed with her, they gained special status, special recognition. So she kind of became a legend. So her so reputation was the surrounding states of very eccentric and spoiled young woman who was playing at basically sea captain, suddenly changed into something more of a, she might be special, she might be chosen, she might be beloved of the gods, or beloved of Poseidon in particular. I'm going to stop for a second, grab a drink, see if anybody has anything to say real quick.
We all wait on your
Okay.
story.
Okay, so this is not what you expected to hear when we were talking about Greco-Persian wars, is it? Not at all. That's what I was hoping for. Because
I've heard the story before, but I'm kind of intrigued. You got my attention.
Good. So all of this is going on, and while all of this is going on, the oldest son, the heir to the throne, he's starting to more and more become the ruler of the city, because the father is getting old, the father is getting kind of pushed aside, stepping down, letting his heir take more and more over the affairs. And as this is going on, her brother says, look, this is enough. This is enough. You're running around there, guiding ships left and right. I cannot stand this anymore. You're a total shame to our family. You need to get married. And since we cannot find you a husband from anywhere else, here's my commander, commander of my troops, basically. He's a great general. He's somebody I trust. He's going to be your husband. Sorry, sister, you're getting married now. Enough of your nonsense. And more or less against her will, she gets married off. To a man she does not love, she does not necessarily want to be with. And of course, the moment that she's a married woman, all of her voyaging, all of her seafaring, all of her even getting out of the house without her husband's explicit permission goes out the window. Very, very depressed and unhappy. Artemisia has a child, she has a son. And for a while that distracts her from her obsession with the sea, from her career, basically, because for the first several years, she's a loving mother to her child. But the problem is that, in Greek society, once a child starts reaching a certain age, especially when it's a boy, he's taken away from mother's care and given more to the proper teachers of the male species, given more into the care of her husband. So once the child starts getting older than 2 or 3, she's getting less and less time with her son, and she's having more and more time to sit at home and be depressed. And the only thing she's able to win for herself with her husband is the right that if she's going to be sitting at home and making fabric anyway, she's allowed to make sails. And that's pretty much all she gets as far as being near the ocean and the beloved ships that she loves so much. Well, and this is probably how her life would have ended. She would have sat at home in utter depression and slowly wasted away. But right about this time, the Ionic rebellion happens, and the war with Persia and between the Persians and Greeks begins. Now, of course, all the Greeks knew who the Persians were. Persians were those people over there somewhere far away, was their great mighty ruler who sits on a golden throne and is 100 feet tall, and never will come over here because we have no dealings with him, because the city where she lives is just, it's the middle of nowhere, really. It's a mediocre little, basically pirate city. It was not enough income for the Persians to really care about. They do pay, most likely they pay tribute to the Persians, but they kind of just send it off once in a while. The Persians are not, you Persians exist over there, we exist over here. They don't care about us, we don't care about them. We send them tribute once in a while, hooray. Well, all would continue the same way if Artemisia's older brother didn't take his commander and some of the troops and did not decide to join the Miletus, basically uprising, and the whole Ionic uprising against the Persians. And as history, as we all know from history, I'm sure everybody has heard the story many times. At first the Greeks were very victorious. They managed to march far enough inland to sack the Sardis, which was the former Lydian capital and currently was Persian provincial, basically satrapy capital. They managed to raise a bunch of temples, which did not make Persians very happy. Persians were very pious peoples. And they were always unsure about the Greeks because, as I have mentioned before, Persians had this little issue with Greeks. Are they Devas worshippers or are they not Devas worshippers? Well, once the Greeks burned down some temples, they decided that Miletus at least definitely was occupied by Devas worshippers, and the city was razed to the ground, and its population was killed and sent off into slavery, and so on and so forth. And along with the local troops, the valiant little army from Halicarnassus was also wiped out. And that's how the Persians were reminded that somewhere over there was a little city whose basically co-ruler decided to join in this evil rebellion against us. And of course, the Persians could not leave that alone. And once they took care of the bigger problems, such as Miletus, etc., they decided to clean up the mess and figure out what's going on. What's the city? Where's the city? Why is the city? What is it doing rebelling against them? Now, the great Persian general and commander, Mardan, which is for some reason known as Mardanius in Western spelling of it, Mardanius was sent off to the city where our main heroess lived to find out what's going on. And of course, when the king of the city, Artemisia's father, Lectimus, learned about the death of his beloved older son, he was in absolute depression and he was just enraged and upset. And he was not very young by this point in time, but he was determined to fight to the death against these evil people who killed his beloved son. He locked the city gates. They were ready to basically standoff ensued to where the Persian army arrived. The Persians tried to send envoys to negotiate. The king said, no, I'm going to fight you to the death. Negotiations went back and forth. And at one point in time, Mardanius demanded that a member of the royal family come out and have a conversation with him, basically as a official representative of the city. And the king had no choice because his oldest son was dead. His youngest son had some sort of a mental condition and was not able to participate in any sort of political life. He, after the news of the death of his brother, legend says that he lost his mind. And so the only other member of the royal family other than the king himself, of course, was his daughter. And so he had no choice but to send Artemisia as his envoy to talk to the Persians and find out what the Persians wanted and what was going on. And so Artemisia, who grew up more or less in a Greek society where women were considered to be something that sits at home and does not open its mouth unless spoken to, arrives in the tent, not of the great king of kings, but of one of his commanders, And of course, the Persian, Mardanius, who is used to the Greek women being something that's not even worth looking at, because you got to understand the Persian women at this point in time, they're still fairly active in the society. I mean, they are they can be warriors. They participate in social life. They are not cloistered away somewhere in the corner of a house like Greeks are doing to their women at this time. So to the Persians, Greek women are pretty dull. There's nothing to talk to them about. They're not interesting. They're rather overweight. They are not at all very good warriors, which is one of the main ways that Persians judge their females. I mean, if I give her a spear, is she going to be able to, ride with me into combat? Well, no, not Greek women. And suddenly in walks this female who is in fairly good shape, quite intelligent, quite independent, and altogether not acting very Greek at all. And he looks at her and he says, well, young lady, tell me, what are you about? Well, he's surprised at her and he starts asking her about her in general. Now, tell me about your life, tell me about who you are. And she sits down, she starts telling him seafaring stories about how she went there with her ships and met with the pirates and how she was, pirating these other ships, how they made this perilous crossing and journeyed all the way to Xerxes. And the Persians, who you got to understand, the Persians had a fleet, but their fleet were the Phoenicians, really. To the Persians, the sea was something that was made more or less of acid. And you probably don't want to touch it, and people die in that, and you got to be absolutely crazy to even venture out onto this very unsafe environment. And they were very much land-based people. I mean, they were Indo-Europeans at their heart. They were steppe peoples. I mean, to them, as we remember, even later, Mongolians had a really big issue with the sea. I mean, it took them a long time to get to the point where they even considered attacking Japan. But the steppe people in general do not like water, especially large open water like the sea.
It would have been better off if it was acid.
Yeah, David is saying they would have been better off if the sea was acid, probably. Bottom line is, to him, the fact that this young woman braved this absolutely perilous, insane environment and moreover ventured to such distances as so far away was absolutely mind-boggling. So they spent quite a bit of time talking, and he was really impressed with her. And, he was telling her how they kind of have a problem now because Phoenicians are way off over there. They're in the middle of this rebellion that they're trying to quell. And their main port cities, Miletus and Hephaestus, are currently not in any shape, thanks to the Persians themselves, to be of any use to the Persians. And they don't really have a very convenient spot to launch any sort of continuous assault on the Greeks in Athens, Sparta, etc. Well, says Artemisia, great commander, I know how to do this. I know how to put together a fleet. Why don't you let my city become your new sea gates? We can help you out. We can help you build a fleet. It will take you a while to get Phoenicia. You need some place for the Phoenicians to land. We're good at receiving people. We're good at repairing ships. We can, put together wharfs. We can put together a great fleet for you. We can be the new fleet, the new navy. Local navy, at least one of the branches of the Persian Empire. And Mardanius is fairly impressed by this idea, and so she runs back into the city. She runs to her father with her eyes burning and shining, saying, Father, guess what? We don't have to fight these guys there. They are actually willing to negotiate, and guess what? Our city can really prosper rather than be destroyed like those idiots over there. If we open our gates, we can prosper from this amazing, collaboration with the Persians. And you got to understand, she does not have much love for the Greeks. I mean, the Greeks have not been exactly nice to her personally. Her father says, you're crazy, woman. They killed your brother, they're invaders, they're evil. I'm not opening my gates. Arrest her. Well, the king commands one thing, but the city peoples think another thing, because the city peoples want to live. They have heard about what happened to Milet, and that was something. The burning down, the sacking, and the totally leveling of Milet was just Miletus in English transcription, Milet in Greek, was a total shock to the entire Greek world, because it was one of the most prosperous. It was the most prosperous of the 12 cities in Anatolia that the Greeks had. The people of small and not very prosperous Halicarnassus do not want to experience the same fate. And so at night they open up the gates to the Persians and they tell Artemisia, look, we think your father is very stricken by his grief. We want to live. We think you have a good plan. Let's go ahead and basically bow down to the Persians and see how much money we can make in the process. And that's how Artemisia becomes a loyal and lifelong Persian supporter. The city starts quickly and rapidly prospering. They get special rights from the Persians. They are allowed to receive all the refugees from the other cities that have been sacked and leveled. The population starts expanding. They start building wharves. They start putting together a fleet. When the Phoenicians arrive, of course, Artemisia is absolutely stricken because she gets along with those guys. Those guys are pretty cool. I mean, she could sit down with them. She could talk about their sea voyages. I mean, by this point in time, the Phoenicians have traveled more or less all over the known world and some of the unknown world. She's listening to their stories. She's inspired. She's a very shrewd and a very practical woman. Well, eventually, sometime later, when the city is already blooming, the construction is going on to the city in his own person, in the shining, blazing light of the blessing of all the Persian glory, arrives, of course, King Xerxes himself. And he's young at this point in time. He's young, he's beloved of the people, he's at the peak of his popularity. He is very attractive. He was Prince Charming of his era. And of course, he meets with this, he learns from his commander that there's this amazing and unusual woman here. So he becomes curious, he meets up with her, and they spend some time talking. They really like each other. I mean, they really hit it off as people. I mean, he likes the way she thinks, she likes the way he thinks. There's even some rumors that there may have been something between them, at least some sort of sympathy, if nothing more. I mean, she's a widow by this point in time, and it's not impossible that there may have even been something, some sort of intimacy. And the reason why I'm even putting weight on that particular rumor is because of some of the events that take place later. The main event that takes place later is that when the Persians are ready to sail off to attack mainland Greece, they have two major admirals. One of them is Phoenician, and one of them is a woman, and that's Artemisia, and she is commanding the entire Persian side of the Greek fleet. And Xerxes trusts her enough to bring her into his immediate council. Later on during the war, Xerxes oftentimes seeks and listens to her advice. He doesn't always listen to it. If he had always listened to it, he would have had a much more successful campaign. He recognizes her, and at that time, for a woman to be in charge of a fleet, of any kind of fleet in any empire, was almost unheard of. This was long before feminism, long before the wonderful heroic queens we have today. And even today, I mean, the number of women who were in charge of, who were admirals or something similar to admirals, I can count on one hand. I mean, she becomes a very prominent character in Persian world. Her city becomes a very prominent city in the Persian world. The citizens are prospering. I'm going to stop for a second, see if anybody wants to jump in with anything else.
I actually had a question because I can't remember everything that we covered on the Phoenicians. How did the Phoenicians feel about her taking that role in the, on that side?
Well, they were basically, they were just one of the many peoples under the Persian rule. They didn't feel one way or another, I'm sure. Most likely they felt slightly befuddled and very amused and kind of curious. I mean, I'm assuming it was the mentality of the time. Just the very concept of a female admiral was enough of a curiosity to overrun any sort of internal jealousies that may have arisen. But in the end of the day, the Persians commanded, the Phoenicians did. I mean, they were definitely a part of the Persian Empire.
I just kind of wondered because obviously the Phoenicians were, they were the seafarers of that time, period. So, a woman taking that role, it's like, would that have been really weird to them? I don't know.
Like I said, I think they would have been amused more than anything else. Besides that, I mean, she knew the local sea. She knew the local navigation very well. I mean, she knew the Greek language. She knew the Greek mentality. She's interacted with them. So in that sense, she was almost an invaluable and a guide to the Persian and to the Phoenician fleet to go through those waters, to deal with those types of tactics and so on and so forth. But like I said, I think that they probably looked at her with quite a bit of curiosity and kind of amusement. I mean, like it or not. And she was still fairly young, fairly attractive. I'm sure that Phoenician captains were not entirely discouraged by having such a member among their number, would be my guess. Anyway, so moving forward, as we all know, Go ahead.
Yeah, quick question. Actually, two questions. One's a general question, and it leads back to our previous two discussions with Africa,
Mhm.
and that is trade language. And so she must have been very, if you will, very, very fluent in the various languages to communicate. It just perhaps an observation, kind of like an open question. And the other question that I had is, what happened to her father?
You know what? The legend does not specifically say what happened to her father. It's hinted that he was basically removed from office and just died shortly thereafter because, oh, actually, you know what? I do know what happened to her father. When she went to remove him from office, he started cursing her. He started cursing her in the name of all the gods, Hades strike you down, Zeus destroy you. And shortly after that, he had a stroke. Bottom line is he died shortly after he uttered those curses. And the rumor started kind of spreading across the city that they saw the shadowy kind of watery form of Poseidon strike him down. So that's the legend. What actually happened to him, of course, we don't know. But that's the legend as it was presented, at least one of the versions.
He had a stroke.
Yeah.
I mean, her father was really loving and really particularly indulging and kind to her. I mean, on the one hand, she does come off as a fairly ruthless woman. On the other hand, there's nothing in her character, at least from what we know, to suggest that she was treacherous enough to necessarily kill her father.
16.
Who knows? Who knows what happened? I mean, he could have died of grief and just indignation. He could have just been quietly poisoned somewhere. I mean, who knows? I doubt that she publicly, as a good, decent Greek woman of that time, I strongly doubt that she would publicly in any way touch her father. Whether or not he was conveniently removed from sight and quietly done away was entirely possible. It's entirely possible. She was definitely not particularly broken up about her husband's or her brother's death, that's for sure. And her other brother did not represent any threat to her because he was practically nonverbal, completely non-functional. So we all know what happened to the Persians when they went up against the Greeks. She was one and the only admiral who repeatedly, and the only member of the immediate council of Xerxes, who repeatedly and insistently advised him against the battle that was decisive for the Persian fleet. And that was the Salamis battle. She knew the Greeks, she knew their tactics, she was very worried about the choice of location. She was very worried about what was going to happen to the Persians if they engaged in that battle. She was trying to talk Xerxes out of that engagement. And that was one of the times he did not listen to her. And so when the battle finally ensued and it unfolded pretty much the way that she predicted, where the larger Persian fleet was cornered into very narrow space, and where it did not have much room to maneuver, and where they were surrounded and more or less being slaughtered. She took decisive action. She saw that the battle was lost, so she grabbed who she could out of her immediate Greek ships, and more or less ramming one of the allied ships on her way out to clear the way. She at least managed to lead a little bit of the fleet, whoever she could gather, out of that more or less bloodbath. The battle was lost. I mean, the bigger Persian fleet was lost. But when she presented herself to Xerxes and she said, "King, I failed you, we failed you, we have lost the battle," Xerxes told her to get up, and he said, "Look, you're the only one who is worthy of being called a warrior here. You're the only one who really truly fought. If any one of my other naval officers would have fought anything like this woman has, we would have won this battle." So, and she was actually, so that loss, that catastrophe for the Persian Empire was a career booster for Artemisia. And so she was given, because the king was very impressed with her bravery, with her tactics, with her wit during that battle, he entrusted her with an absolutely crucial task. He understood at this point in time that there was no more conquest. He has lost the war. But he had to go back home, and he had to report to his people, as the king, about what achievements he has made with this great army and this great fleet that he has gathered with all of their money. Well, when they was throughout the wars, they were sacking different Greek city-states as they sacked Athens twice. The Persians gathered up quite a bit of goods, quite a bit of precious cargo. And this precious cargo needed to be gotten the heck out of Greece and brought back to Persia. And so she was entrusted with a very crucial task of ensuring that those treasures got properly delivered back home, despite the fact that the waters were more or less saturated with, because not all Greeks made it to the actual battle, but all the Greeks made it to the aftermath. And a lot of Greek ships were going back and forth across the waves, trying to intercept the Persian cargo ships to more or less unload the riches, the goods that the Persians have acquired during their attempted conquest. Very cunningly, very carefully, very
including much of Athens itself.
Yeah, including much of Athens itself. Bottom line is, she used all her cunning, all her experience, all of her intuition, all of her wits. She would carry. There were times when she would be carrying double flags, for example, on her ships, which is something that pirates would use much later towards the modern times, where she would switch. She would be sailing under Persian flag, and then the moment there would be pursuit, she would go ahead and switch the flags real quick. And she fooled her pursuers on multiple occasions by various trickery, making them believe that she was an allied Greek ship or that she was somebody who has defected from the Persians. At one point in time, when she was being pursued by an overwhelming Greek fleet, she repeated the same feat that she did still as a young girl, and she went through the Bosphorus second time in a storm, and leaving the pursuers far behind her. Bottom line is, she has succeeded at the task that was given her. She saved the treasures, and in doing so, she more or less saved Xerxes' head. Because had he returned home as somebody who lost everything, there's a good chance that his nobles would have not supported him. They would have seen him as somebody who has lost his place as the chosen one, as the king that was granted the right to rule by holy mandate. The bottom line is, unless Xerxes had something to show for all this war, and now he could go home and say, look, we set out to punish these city-states, we punished them. We set out to sack Athens, check it out, Athens have been sacked, right? And we have all this money and all this treasure. So, hey, it's very successful and glorious campaign. She saved Xerxes' ability to rule. Xerxes recognized and respected that fact. He not only did he name her the chief commander over all his navy, basically. Not only was she granted the official tyranny of her region and her city, which she was granted way back when under Mardanius. She was named the tyrant of the city because she couldn't be an official ruler of the city, but she had a baby son at that point in time. So to the Greek masses, she was kind of, because a tyrant is somebody who rules by people's choice, but not by right. And because a woman technically in Greek political life could not possibly be a ruler, but nonetheless here she was being a regent basically for her child. She was basically declared a tyrant. Now her son would no longer be a tyrant because her son had a legitimate claim to the rule. Does that make sense? Bottom line is, not only was she named the tyrant of the city, and not only was she named the basically admiral of their fleet, she was basically named, she was accepted into the warrior class of the Persian society for all that she has done for the Persian Empire. And she was no longer a vassal kind of subjugated ruler of the territory. She was a full-on Persian representative, a Persian noble ruling that region. And her city continued to grow and prosper. She ruled for 24 years, which is quite a decent stretch of time. And only after her death did her son take the throne. The fact that she was honored and respected and beloved by her people can be easily seen in the fact that multiple women afterwards in the dynasty were given her name. So obviously she was somebody who was much respected. By the way, her father's name was also used going forth in the dynasty, which is another reason I don't think she offed her father. I suspect that she might have inadvertently caused him to die of grief or something like that. And that name was passed on in the dynasty, and so was hers. She did get married eventually. And how could have she done that much later on? How could have she possibly gotten married? Well, since she dedicated herself to Poseidon, okay, the first time she was forced into marriage, but the second time voluntarily, well, she got married to a Phoenician captain. And as we all remember, Phoenician captains by default, any Phoenician captain by default is a priest, the high priest of Dagon, which is the god of sea, which to Greeks more or less equates Poseidon. And so that was an interesting loophole that she was able to use, at least propaganda-wise. She died at a decent age. She died very beloved by her people, very successful, leaving a very steady dynasty behind her. And moreover, one of her descendants, many years down the road, Artemisia, I can't remember if it was second or the third, I think it was the third, who was ruling as a full-on queen during the war, was Rhodos, whose husband Mausoleum was killed in the war with Rhodos, and whose basically stricken down body was brought to her, and she was crying over his dead body, and then cleverly trapped the Rhodesian fleet and wiped it out, and went and sacked Rhodes, and was the richest that she was able to acquire from the sack of the city of Rhodes. Built a lasting monument to her beloved husband, and that's how we have the word mausoleum in our language today, because that was the very first kind of monumental burial that Greeks would marvel at, because according to descriptions, it was something like a pyramid with some Greek columns in the middle. Bottom line is, the legend of Artemisia lives today, and actually even as recently as 1967. I mean, this is a woman, probably one of the very few women in that time period that is distinctly remembered to this day. 1967, Iran purchased a ship, a naval ship from Britain, and that was going to be the largest ship in the Iranian fleet, and they renamed that ship, and it was Artemisia. It was one of their flagman ships for quite a few years. So it's something that she probably would have quite approved of, because to have a ship, a naval military ship in the sea that's named after a woman who fought in this war so many years ago by the country that she decided to give her allegiance to and served her entire life. I don't know, I think that's a fitting memory, and it just tells you how significant she was in history and how well she's still remembered, at least among the descendants of the Persians. And so, yeah, that's kind of my intro into the Greco-Persian wars, because what we usually hear is the Greek perspective, and which is very one-sided. But if people like Artemisia, and she was not the only one, she was just kind of unique in being, well, she was female, and she was kind of a curiosity and somebody very memorable in that time. Even Herodotus, who wrote about her, there's some people joke about him having a crush on her, because he does not want to talk about any other Greeks who fought on the Persian side, though there were quite a bit of them. But Artemisia, he doesn't have much bad to say about. A cunning commander, a brilliant woman, somebody who saved her city from being completely burned down and destroyed and wiped out of history, like Miletus was. Somebody who left a lasting dynasty, who was good at what she did, knew what her calling was, and I thought it was a story worth telling. That's pretty much all I has. By the way, of the intro to that lovely conflict.
Yeah.
David wants to jump in, so I'm going to go ahead and silence real quick.
I think that's a great way to introduce it, because we've all heard the Western slant on it, and this fits into it. I think we should probably will next time touch on the military sides and political sides of it all. Basically, the whole Ionian revolt and how it was a man named Aristagoras Yeah, he was a tyrant that he would incite a Ionian rebellion of Greeks throughout the uh, Asia Minor. So that's the big story that comes next, I guess. But I think it's very important to put a human perspective on it, though. And yes, there were many Greeks that thought living under the peace of the Persian Empire wasn't such a bad thing. We hear it all because of the whole democracy thing and waving our flag sometimes. But yeah, it's good to look at history from various angles because nobody's got a monopoly on truth. Nobody, everybody's got a perspective.
I was going to say, I think it's a good idea to look at it from more than just one skewed perspective. That's, the typical, you could call it propaganda, you could call it whatever. So that was a wonderful story, actually. I mean, we don't know everything about it, as you said, but caught my attention.
And like I said, I'm sorry I was kind of lecturing the entire time, but it's kind of a narrative that's kind of cool too. It's really not that well known, and I think she's somebody worth remembering. Definitely somebody who stood out.
And I don't know that they did her a favor in 300.
No, well, the way that she's represented in 300 is a joke. I mean, it's just a joke. I mean, the way that the Persians and Persian allies are represented in 300 is a joke. She was never a sex slave. She never tried to seduce no Greek commanders. She never even interacted with them. I mean, she was wholly on the Persian side and wholly interacting with the Persians.
She survived the battle.
And yeah, and she said she definitely did not get killed in the battle. The Greeks, especially the Athenians, in their telling of the story of their defeat of the Persians, Athenians did use it heavily for propaganda to try to aggressively unite the Greek city-states around themselves, almost forcibly, oftentimes forcibly, drawing them into subjugated alliances. But another important role that Artemisia played in the entire war is that right before this, the decisive battle where the Persian commander got killed, Xerxes came to her for advice on whether he should continue to lead the army, because the Persian Empire was big, and I mean the Greeks were just a small kind of peoples on the outskirts that the Persians were dealing with. They had a lot of other internal problems and things happening. So Xerxes was wondering if he should stay in Greece and continue to lead the army himself, or whether he should take off and take care of some other internal matters. And she empathically advised him to go home and to let his commanders deal with the Greeks. And that may have saved Xerxes' life because shortly thereafter, the Persian army was defeated on land. And so that might have been another reason why he was very grateful to her. And
There's another argument there.
Which one?
The one that if he had stayed, he might have.
I doubt it.
I doubt it too.
I have strong suspicion that Xerxes was not exactly the commander that his father was, per se. He was definitely, he was second generation royalty, and usually that's when he was still trying to do the right thing and be charming, but I'm not so sure he was a brilliant military commander like Cyrus was, or like Darius was before him. So, but yeah, I think that's pretty much everything, unless somebody else has something else they want to jump in with.
No, I really appreciate David's comment about humanizing history. And because this is, after all, it's a story. And it's a shared story. And it's, and I appreciate that. And sharing that, sharing the story of Artemisia is, you don't hear that.
Right.
So that's one thing. And actually just on the side, while it's on my mind, it's mentioned a number of times about piracy. And so just in the future, that might make a really fun episode to talk about piracy in the ancient world.
Oh, absolutely. Actually, that'd be awesome. Because yeah, anytime you hear merchant anywhere from ancient world, all the way to more or less present times, it's about interchangeable with the word pirate. I mean,
not as much anymore.
Well, all the way up at late Middle Ages, even Renaissance time.
Probably till the age of through the age of sail.
Yeah, I mean, more or less into modern times. That's what I mean.
Right.
So yeah, that's interesting because yeah, back then, I mean, if you sailed, you were half the time you were a merchant, the other half the time you were a pirate. Basically, that's what you did out. Because who knows what's happening out there on the sea, right? You see a passing ship and you think you can take them, go for it. But yeah, that would be fun. That's a good idea. We should do that for sure. Because especially once we get to Rome, I mean,
many groups in the Mediterranean.
yeah, I mean, there was whole kingdoms and whole peoples who specialized in nothing but piracy. I mean, heck, Sicily did that for a long time. A lot of other island nations did that. Basically, it's the basis of living. So yeah, that'd be awesome. That's everything, I think. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and it's good to see you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all next time.
Good to see you all. I'll see you later. Everybody be well.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Good to see you all. Cheers.
Bye.
Glow of a campfire, pale electrical glow. Both cast out shadows as our legends unfold. We are the archetypes that exist within every man's soul. And we will live forever as long as stories are told. We are the archetypes that exist within every man's soul. And we will live forever, or as long as stories are told. We are the archetypes that exist within every man's soul.